This is section 4 of chapter 6, the building blocks of life. All organisms are made up of carbon molecules. There are two different classifications. The first is what we call organic. Now don't think of organic as in the way they are grown. This is a different type. This is the science word of organic. There are two parts to the definition. One is that it comes from living things, and the second part is that it has to have carbon in it. Our four main examples are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. The other type is inorganic. Again, anytime you see the word in, that means not. So they are things that do not contain carbon and are not living. And our example is water. There are four categories of macromolecules that we will discuss and learn about. The first one is carbohydrates, which are represented by the bread. The second is lipids, which is represented by the butter picture. The third are proteins, which is the chicken, the fish, the steak, and the beans. And the last is the nucleic acids, which is represented by the DNA picture. The first macromolecule we will be discussing in depth are carbohydrates. Examples are potato, bread, spaghetti, fruits, and vegetables. They have and do give us a very quick energy source for our bodies. Has your coach ever told you to carb load? Well, that's why, because carbs give you that quick energy that you need for that boost for your activity. They also provide structural support in our cell membranes. The basic building block of a carbohydrate is called a monosaccharide. They contain the three elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. There are three types of carbohydrates. The first are monosaccharides, which I told you are the building blocks. Sometimes they are referred to as simple sugars. The second is disaccharide, which is made up of two monosaccharides. The last are polysaccharides, which are made up of many monosaccharides. This is the main source that we do consume. However, our bodies have to break it down into our basic building blocks or into our monosaccharides for it to absorb for our nutrients that we need. So, what are the monosaccharides? There are three of them. The first is glucose. These are found in plants and animals. The second is fructose, which is found in fruit. The last is galactose, which is found in dairy products. All of these have the same chemical makeup. They all have C6H12O6. However, their structures are different, as you can see in the diagram on the left. The second type are disaccharides, which again are made up of two monosaccharides put together. The first is sucrose, which are found in plants, mostly fruit, which you can see in the picture. They are made up of glucose and fructose. The second is maltose, which is also found in plants and made up of glucose and glucose. The third is lactose, which is found in milk, and that's made up of glucose plus galactose. Have you ever heard of someone being lactose intolerant? Well, that means that they have difficulty breaking down lactose. That's why they have an upset stomach after consuming some kind of dairy product. The last category of carbohydrates are polysaccharides. This is when three or more building blocks or monosaccharides are bonded together. The first is cellulose. This is the structural support in cell walls, or basically the fiber. That stuff that our body doesn't digest very well, which keeps you regular. The second is starch, which is the storage of energy that we get from plants, like potatoes, spaghetti, that carb-loading kind of stuff. The third is glycogen, which is energy storage we get from glucose found in the liver and skeletal muscles of mammals. like when you eat a steak or ribs or ham or something of the like. The last is what we call chitin, and that's the structural support of the hard outer covering of shrimp, lobsters, insects, or fungi. Have you ever stepped on a bug and then you hear that crunch? Well, that's the chitin that you just broke. The second type of macromolecules are lipids. Examples are butter, oil, lard, and wax. These give us a very high energy storage, even higher than carbohydrates. They provide barriers which make up part of our plasma membrane. There are two parts to their building blocks. One is what we call a fatty acid, and the other is what we call a glycerol. They contain three elements: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Triglycerides are the main type of lipid, which you can see in the diagram at the top. It sort of looks like the letter E. Organisms do need lipids to function properly because of the high energy content, the barriers that they create, and the cholesterol and steroids that they also make up. I'm sure that you have heard about all the media attention on saturated and unsaturated fat consumption. Well, here's a little bit extra info for you. One is their saturated fats. These are a little bit more white in color. They do come from animals. They are solid. They have single bonds. And because, as you can see in the picture, all the C's and the H's, the carbons and the hydrogens, have all those single bonds, it makes it very rigid, which makes it more solid. So the best example would be like butter. And I say that they're bad in quotes because you should have some, but you definitely don't want a lot. You definitely don't want to have a lot in your diet. The other type is what we call unsaturated fats. These are more yellow in color. They do come from plants. They are more liquid, and they contain double bonds. As you can see in the diagram, some of the carbons and hydrogens are in double bonds, which makes the fatty acid kind of kink up, which makes it more liquidy, which is why the examples you have there is oil. And I put better in quotation marks here because oils are better for you than something like butter or lard, but again, if you consume too much, then it does become bad. There are some other lipids that are very important, but most of these we will discuss in upcoming chapters. The first one is what we talk about is called the phospholipid. This is what makes up the composition of our plasma or our cell membrane. The steroids, the hormones, and the cholesterol are also important, but we will discuss them in upcoming chapters. The third category of macromolecules are proteins. The examples would be chicken, beans, eggs, and the fish. They do have four main functions. One is to help fight disease. The second is to transport substances. The third is to speed up reactions. And the fourth is to provide structural support, which would be like in your hair, nails, and your skin. The basic building block of a protein is something called an amino acid. It has four elements in it: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. It makes up 15% of your body mass and is involved in nearly all functions. This is why proteins are super, super important for us. The basic building block again of a protein is something called an amino acid. There are 5 parts to it. The first you can see at the top, which is just a single hydrogen atom. The second off to the left is what we call an amino group, which is where your nitrogen comes into play. Off to the other side is what we call a carboxyl group. And then at the bottom we have something called the R group. And this is what makes each of our 22 amino acid structures different so that you can tell them apart. When one amino acid does bond with another amino acid, that bonding is called a dipeptide bond. Or for short, we just call a peptide bond. This is also going to be important in future chapters, so please don't forget peptide bond. This peptide bond actually occurs between the amino group of one amino acid and the carboxyl group of another group. So again, why are proteins so important for us? Well, as I said before, they do help to fight disease. These are your antibodies, the things that do help to fight off germs, colds, the flu, or other kind of diseases. The other part is I said that it helps to transport. Well, that's called hemoglobin, and that helps to transport oxygen in your blood. This ensures that all parts of your body are properly oxygenated. If this hemoglobin cannot transport oxygen properly, a person can become anemic, or other bad things could also happen. Thirdly, we have something called collagen. As you can see this man here pulling at his skin, if he would let it go, it should fall back very quickly. That means his collagen is at a proper level. However, as you age, or in the elderly, the collagen isn't quite where it should be, and as a result, when you do pull your skin like that, it falls down very, very slowly because the collagen isn't at the proper amount. The last one is enzymes, which we have already talked about, and that is to help speed up chemical reactions to decrease that amount of activation energy. Our last type of macromolecule are nucleic acids. The basic building block here is something called the nucleotide, and it has three parts as you can see in the picture: the phosphate group, the sugar, and the base. We cannot eat a nucleic acid, they are already in our bodies. They are made up of 5 different types of elements: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. There are 3 main types. The first type is what we call DNA, which helps to store genetic information like our genes and our chromosomes. What makes it special is that it is double-stranded. The second type is RNA, and it helps to make and produce proteins. This usually happens in a nucleus, and it is special because it is single-stranded. The last type is something we call ATP, and this is our energy for our cells that help them to perform all of our cellular functions and reactions. And it is special because it does contain 3 phosphate groups. Our essential questions for section 4. 1. What is the role of carbon in living organisms? 2. What are the 4 major families of biological molecules? 3. What are the functions of each macromolecule? 4. What are the building blocks of each macromolecule? And some vocabulary words: macromolecule, polymer, carbohydrate, lipid, protein, amino acid, nucleic acid, and nucleotide. At this time, this concludes your Chapter 6 notes.